Few creations in history have captured the imagination of children and adults across the world quite like Pokémon. Bright yellow Pikachus plastered across lunchboxes and billboards. Millions of kids glued to their Game Boys, chanting, "Gotta catch 'em all," as they traded creatures through a tiny gray cable. Global tournaments, box office hits, even billion-dollar trading cards. Pokémon is not just a game, it is a cultural empire. But behind this global juggernaut lies a story that feels almost unbelievable. A quiet, shy boy who loved wandering through the forests of Tokyo, capturing bugs in glass jars. His name was Satoshi Tajiri, and his childhood hobby of insect collecting, something so simple and so pure, would eventually transform into a phenomenon that redefined entertainment. This is not just the story of a video game. This is the story of a boy who refused to give up his curiosity. A boy who found wonder in the smallest of creatures, and who held on to that wonder long enough to share it with the entire planet. But like every empire, Pokemon's rise was not without struggle. Controversies, criticism, and shocking twists would follow it across decades. And yet, even now, Pokemon stands as the highest-grossing media franchise in the world. To understand how it all began, we must first step back to the rice fields and forests of Machida, Japan, and meet the child who would one day change the world. Satoshi Tajiri was born in 1965 in Machida, a suburb of Tokyo that was, at the time, still surrounded by fields, streams, and wooded areas. Unlike many children his age, Tajiri was not especially interested in sports or schoolyard games. His passion was exploration. Armed with a net and jars, he would spend hours alone in the tall grass or crouched at the edges of ponds catching insects. He became particularly fascinated with beetles, which he studied and kept at home. He noticed their behaviors, how they moved, how they fought, and how different species interacted. It was not just play, it was an obsession. His friends, amused by his unusual passion, nicknamed him Dr. Bug. But as the years passed, Machida began to change. Tokyo expanded. The rice fields were paved over, streams were redirected, forests turned into apartment complexes, and concrete roads. The habitats where Tajiri once collected insects disappeared, and with them, many of the creatures he loved. For most children, it might have been a passing hobby, forgotten as they grew older. But for Tajiri, the memory of those insects lingered, becoming a symbol of childhood curiosity that he would never let go of. Around the same time, another passion entered his life: video games. Arcades were exploding in Japan in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and the young Tajiri quickly fell in love with games like Space Invaders. He didn't just play casually, he studied them, learned their patterns, and even skipped school to spend more time in the arcades. For him, video games were not just entertainment. They were puzzles, worlds to be taken apart and understood, much like the insects he used to collect. Unfortunately, Tajiri's obsession with arcades and his tendency to wander meant that schoolwork was often left behind. His grades plummeted and teachers viewed him as a lost cause, someone who had no direction or future. At one point, his parents feared he would never find stability. But what appeared to be failure on the surface was actually the birth of a new kind of education. Tajiri was teaching himself electronics, programming, and eventually game design. He would take apart devices just to see how they worked. He dreamed of building his own games, even when such a path seemed impossible. In the early 1980s, Tajiri began writing about arcade games. With illustrator Ken Sugimori, who would become his lifelong collaborator, he created a small fanzine called Game Freak. They hand-drew the pages, photocopied them, and sold them to other arcade fans. At first, Game Freak was nothing more than a labor of love, tips and tricks for beating games, reviews, and thoughts about design. But over time, it gained a following. And with each issue, Tajiri learned more about what made games work. Eventually, he asked himself a critical question. Instead of only writing about games, why not make them? With Sugimori's art skills and his own programming drive, Tajiri transformed Game Freak from a magazine into a small development studio. They began pitching game ideas, slowly gaining attention. But Tajiri's true vision was still hidden inside him. A game that would capture the magic of bug collecting, the excitement of trading, the thrill of discovery. The idea came in 1989, when Nintendo released the Game Boy, a portable console that allowed players to take games with them anywhere. The Game Boy had a peculiar feature, a link cable, a simple wire that let two consoles connect. Most players and developers thought of it as a way to compete in puzzle games like Tetris, but Tajiri saw something extraordinary. What if, through that cable, players could trade creatures back and forth? What if the joy he once experienced catching beetles could be reborn digitally? This was the seed of Pokémon. He imagined a world full of strange creatures, each unique, where the thrill wasn't just in battling, but in capturing and trading with friends. Children could link their Game Boys and exchange creatures, creating the same social excitement he felt as a child when trading insects with his classmates. For 6 long years, Tajiri pursued the project. Money was scarce. His parents worried about his future. He worked such long hours that he often stayed awake for days at a time, collapsing from exhaustion, then continuing again. Many people doubted the game would ever be completed, but Tajiri's vision never wavered. When he pitched the idea to Nintendo, executives were uncertain. It was strange, untested, and ambitious, but one man saw its potential: Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario and Zelda. Miyamoto took Tajiri under his wing, mentoring him and encouraging the project forward. With Sugimori designing the creatures and Nintendo providing resources, the dream slowly became reality. Finally, in 1996, Pokémon Red and Green were released in Japan. At first, sales were modest, but word of mouth began to spread. Children were captivated. The trading mechanic, allowing one version to have creatures the other didn't, made kids desperate to connect with friends, to complete their collection. The dream of catching them all had become real. For decades, Pokémon lived inside screens, cards, and imaginations. But in 2016, it broke free into the real world. With the release of Pokémon Go, a mobile game developed by Niantic in collaboration with Nintendo and the Pokémon Company, millions of people suddenly had the chance to hunt Pokémon in their own neighborhoods. The concept was revolutionary. By combining augmented reality with GPS technology, Pokémon Go placed digital creatures in real-world locations. Players ventured to parks, monuments, and city streets, smartphones in hand, capturing Pokémon as if they were truly there. What followed was nothing short of a global phenomenon. Within days of its release, cities around the world were filled with crowds, not for concerts or protests, but for Pikachus and Charmanders. Strangers gathered at Pokestops, cheering each other on, teaming up to take down gyms, and racing to catch rare creatures. In those first months, Pokémon Go achieved something magical. It united people across generations, backgrounds, and countries in a shared sense of discovery. But with the craze came problems. Players trespassed on private property, stumbled into dangerous areas, and even caused accidents by playing while walking or driving. Police departments around the world issued warnings. News outlets reported both heartwarming stories. Friendships formed, depression lifted, communities built, and tragic ones of injuries and disputes. Yet, despite controversy, Pokémon Go became one of the most downloaded mobile games in history, earning billions in revenue. In many ways, it fulfilled Satoshi Tajiri's original dream more perfectly than he could have imagined. Children and adults venturing out into their environments, discovering creatures, trading with friends, and reconnecting with the natural world, just as he once had with insects in the rice fields of Machida. Of course, no empire grows without facing shadows. Pokémon, despite its cheerful exterior, has seen its fair share of controversy. One of the most infamous moments occurred in 1997, when a Pokémon anime episode titled Deno Senshi Porygon aired in Japan. It featured flashing red and blue lights that caused seizures in hundreds of children across the country. The incident made headlines worldwide and forced the show to go on hiatus. Nintendo and the anime's producers quickly responded, banning the episode permanently. To this day, it has never been re-aired. The scandal left an indelible mark on the franchise and sparked new conversations about health and media safety. Religious groups also targeted Pokémon, particularly in the West. Some claimed the creatures promoted occultism, gambling, or violence. Others saw the concept of evolution within the games as conflicting with religious beliefs. Schools banned Pokémon cards, not only because of moral panic, but because of playground disputes, theft, and even fights. Newspapers ran stories warning parents that Pokémon was more than a harmless fad. It was dangerous. There were also concerns about addiction. Critics worried that children were spending too much time glued to their Game Boys or obsessing over collecting cards. Some psychologists warned that the "gotta catch 'em all" slogan encouraged compulsive behavior. And yet, despite waves of backlash, nothing could stop Pokémon. What began as a niche Japanese handheld title has become a universal language of play and imagination. As for Satoshi Tajiri, the man who started it all, he lives quietly far from the spotlight. Rarely appearing in public, he avoids fame and maintains a private life, but his vision remains immortal. The boy, once known as Dr. Bug, created not just a game, but a cultural touchstone that will outlive him, continuing to inspire generations yet to come.